Gerald Ford was the 30th president for the United States of America and served from 1974 until 1977. He was the first president to have not been elected for vice president nor president, and he took over as president when Nixon resigned after the Watergate scandal in 1974. Gerald Ford had a lot of experience in the political world. For him, it all began in 1948 when he was elected into the U.S. House of Representatives. And for the next 25 years, he was in the political world. In 1965, he became the House Minority Leader. He wasn't actually elected as vice president nor president because the other candidate, Spiro Agnew, had beat him. However, when it was revealed that Agnew was accepting bribes, he was indicted. Gerald Ford was then nominated to take Agnew's place as vice president.
Our distinguished guests and my fellow Americans, I proudly present to you the man whose name I will submit to the Congress of the United States for confirmation as the Vice President of the United States, Congressman Gerald Ford of Michigan.
And he was chosen by the highest powers of Congress, both Democratic and Republican. After Agnew resigned, President Nixon invited two Democratic leaders, Speaker Carl Albert and Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansell, to get their opinions on Gerald Ford. Speaker Albert said, "We gave Nixon no choice but Ford. Congress made Jerry Ford president." From this moment on, Gerald Ford was the new president of the United States, and he was one of the most honest and loyal ones.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Gerald Ford had the reputation amongst his peers in Congress as a friendly, honest, loyal, and hard-working Republican.
When Ford became president, he recognized the anxiety caused by the Watergate scandal. He intended to help move the country forward from their slump. When he took office, he attempted to cultivate his image as someone friendly and down-to-earth. The American economy was on a downpull. Inflation and unemployment were rapidly rising. Right after his presidency began, Ford gave Nixon a full pardon. Ford knew that if Nixon was persecuted, it would reignite bitter passions.
I was one of those who spoke out against his actions then. But time has a way of clarifying past events. And now we see that President Ford was right. His courage and dedication to our country made it possible for us to begin the process of healing and put the tragedy of Watergate behind us.
The crumbling American economy was the main domestic issue that Ford had to address. As inflation rose and rose, the price of oil increased rapidly as well. This proved to be a huge blow to the economy as Americans had huge increases in unemployment and little money to pay for anything. In addition, the increase in unemployment was the result of increased foreign competition, which slowed down economic growth and job creations. To fight the inflation problem, Ford proposed a tax hike and a reduction of federal spendings. He attempted to build public support with an economic campaign called WIN, or Whip Inflation Now. However, it was proved to be a huge failure on his part. The media even portrayed it as a silly public relations gimmick. Due to his many unsuccessful policies, many criticized his lack of action towards helping the economy. Ford kept attempting to find a way to help the economy, and finally he was able to pass the Revenue Adjustment Act. This cut taxes by $9 billion, and with assurance that the Congress would reduce spendings this time round. As for the energy crisis, he proposed in January of 1975 to put a tariff on imported oil and a new tax on domestic oil producers. Ford's idea was to stimulate more domestic oil production, which he believed would help lower prices overall.
When Ford took over President Nixon's presidency, he inherited the foreign policy and his foreign policy advisors. While Ford had not developed an expertise in American foreign relations as a congressman or as a vice president, he was generally familiar with the major international issues facing the country. Given Ford's ultimate decision to retain Kissinger, it became little surprise that a new administration would continue the foreign policies pursued by Nixon and Kissinger during the previous 5 years. Ford entered the presidency with U.S.-Soviet relations on very shaky ground. The détente was an effort to lessen tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States that had existed since the end of World War II. It did not imply complete trust, nor was it a formal alliance. It was a period where two nations began to explore ways in which they could work together for both national security and economic goals. Throughout 1973 and 1974, the Soviets grew increasingly frustrated with the several U.S. politicians, mainly Senator Henry Scoop Jackson, who had successfully tied American trade with the Soviets to the relaxation of Soviet immigration policies. The 1973 Yom Kippur War in the Middle East had nearly led to the massive military involvement of the superpowers. Ford and the Soviets agreed in 1974 to the Vladivostok Accords, which provided a general outline for a successor treaty to the SALT I Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, negotiated by Nixon and Kissinger in 1972.
When Gerald Ford became president, he inherited one of the most difficult situations the nation has ever seen, the breakdown of trust in government with the Watergate scandal. Gerald Ford had become president in a way no other person has before or since, without winning a single national election. He was appointed vice president by Richard Nixon after Spiro Agnew resigned after the chaos of the Watergate scandal. Nixon made a poll and had people from both parties vote on who should be the next president, and Ford won number one on the list. His main concern was, quote, to pardon Nixon and get his problems off the desk in the Oval Office. His attempt to move on from Nixon's problems were too sudden, resulting in failure when he granted him a full pardon. This completely blemished his image in the public's eyes. However, he still did create positive impacts on the country, all of them unfortunately overshadowed by his more negative ones. For example, he brought inflation down substantially when he took office, and that was due to his constant fight with the Democratic Congress to restrain spending. He had aided the American economy to recover successfully, a great feat of his in his time in the office. The Vietnam War was still going on when he became president, and it reflected badly on his presidency, although it was not his war. However, he did have an opportunity to redeem himself when the communist Cambodian government seized a U.S. merchant ship, the Mayagoose, and took its crew captive. The president sent in the Marines, and the ship and its crew were returned safely. This was a high point of Ford's presidency since he extricated the crew from the Cambodians. In the presidential campaign against Jimmy Carter in 1976, he said that there is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe and there never will be under Ford administration. What he meant to say was that Eastern Europe do not consider themselves part of the Soviet Union. However, this still cost him the election. Gerald Ford was the first president ever to testify before the House Judiciary Committee, where he received harsh comments and treatment from Democrats over his pardon of Nixon. However, he still chose to stand up for his decision to pardon Nixon, showing how fervent of a man he is when it comes to his decisions and beliefs in his own actions. Ford may not be remembered for any major changes during his presidency, but then he assumed the office at a time when the last thing this country needed was more drama. Although his pardon of Nixon was highly criticized at the time, it still helped put the nation back on the road to recovery from the Watergate scandal. He died on December 26, 2006, at the age of 93, living longer than any other U.S. president. His legacy may be quiet, but the impacts of his presidency still obviously exist in U.S. politics today.
I do believe with all my heart and mind and spirit that I, not as president, but as a humble servant of God, will receive justice without mercy if I fail to show mercy.